When Anna and I first arrived at the house, there was this sense of excitement mixed with relief. We had finally made it, our own place, inherited from Anna's family. It was old, sure, but charming in a rustic kind of way. The countryside stretched out around us, peaceful and quiet. It felt like a new beginning. As we stepped inside, the age of the house became more apparent. The floors creaked with every step, and there was a faint smell of something antique. The walls were worn, the paint chipped in places, but that was part of its character. We joked that it had personality. While exploring, we stumbled upon a door that we didn't expect, a basement door. It was locked, and the keys we had didn't fit. Oddly enough, there had been no mention of a basement when Anna's family gave her the place. We made a mental note to deal with it later. For now, our focus was on getting settled, unpacking boxes, and trying to make this old house feel like home. But as the day went on, I couldn't shake this odd feeling. It was subtle, just under the surface, like the house was watching, waiting. The creak seemed louder at night, and the wind outside took on an eerie tone as it moved through the cracks. Anna didn't say anything, but I could tell she felt it too. Something about this place just wasn't right. But we pushed it aside, convincing ourselves it was just the typical weirdness of an old house. It started subtly, barely noticeable at first. Just faint, almost imperceptible whispers coming from below, from behind that locked basement door. At first, Anna and I laughed it off. Old houses make weird noises, I said. It's probably the wind or the pipes. We had just moved in, and I didn't want to admit that something felt off. But as the days went on, those whispers didn't stop. If anything, they became more persistent. I'd be sitting in the living room, the house quiet except for the occasional groan of the wooden beams, when suddenly, I'd hear its soft, indistinct murmurs from the basement. Anna heard them too. She tried to brush it off at first, like I did, but I could see the unease creeping into her expression. We both told ourselves it was the house settling, maybe some weird acoustics or plumbing issues, but deep down, we knew better. The whispers started to feel intentional, like someone or something was calling out. There were moments when it almost sounded like they were saying our names, but that couldn't be right. Could it? The tension between us started to grow. Neither of us wanted to admit it, but we were both having trouble sleeping. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, every creak or groan sending my heart racing. Anna wasn't any better. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I'd hear her sit up, straining to listen to the noises coming from downstairs. We told ourselves it was just our minds playing tricks, that we were stressed from the move, but the whispers continued. Louder, clearer, and always from that locked basement. It was Anna who found it. She'd been up in the attic, sorting through old boxes and dusty furniture left behind by previous residents. We hadn't paid much attention to the attic before. There was enough to deal with downstairs, but something about that day led her to explore. Hours passed before I heard her footsteps coming down, slow and hesitant. In her hands, she held an old, worn journal. I found this hidden behind a loose brick in the attic, she said, her voice uneasy. The journal looked ancient, its pages yellowed and fragile, the cover tattered and crumbling at the edges. We sat down together, flipping through its pages, and that's when we learned about Victor. Victor had lived in this house long before we ever set foot in it. His handwriting was shaky, frantic in places, as he recounted his time here. He too had been tormented by the whispers. It wasn't just us. The more we read, the more disturbing the entries became. He described hearing voices, seeing shadows moving in the corners of his vision, and feeling an overwhelming sense of dread that he couldn't shake. What was most unsettling, though, was Victor's obsession with something he called the entity. According to his journal, this malevolent force had been feeding on his fear, growing stronger the more terrified he became. He wrote about performing strange rituals, ones he believed would free him from the entity's grasp. But the final entries were erratic, filled with panic. The ritual had failed, and Victor seemed to lose hope. As Anna and I read through the last few pages, a cold realization washed over us. We weren't imagining the whispers, and we weren't the first to experience them. Whatever haunted Victor all those years ago was still here, lingering in the house, waiting for new victims. The whispers had been growing louder, more insistent, and now we knew why. The house wasn't just old, it was cursed. And now, it was our turn to face whatever had been tormenting its inhabitants for years. It had been days since we found Victor's journal, and neither of us could shake the feeling that something dark was lurking in the house. The whispers were getting louder, creeping into every quiet moment, until it felt like they were right next to us. We tried to ignore it, but the weight of it all was unbearable. We had to know what was in the basement. With shaking hands, Anna held the key as we stood in front of the locked door. I could feel the tension between us, a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. We had avoided this moment for as long as we could, but there was no going back now. As the lock clicked open, a cold draft blew out, chilling us to the bone. Slowly, we stepped inside. The air was thick and heavy, almost suffocating, as if the basement itself was pressing down on us. Dust-covered furniture was scattered around, relics of the past, long forgotten. But it wasn't the furniture that caught our attention, it was the symbols. Strange, jagged markings were scrawled on the walls and floor, identical to the ones described in Victor's journal. Ritualistic objects were strewn about, candles, jars filled with unidentifiable substances, and books with pages torn out. It was all there, just as Victor had written. We moved deeper into the basement, feeling more unnerved with every step. In one corner we found what we had feared most, a small altar, crudely constructed, surrounded by remnants of a failed ritual. I could almost hear Victor's frantic voice echoing in my head, recounting his desperate attempts to rid the house of the entity. But he had failed. And in his failure, he had unleashed something far worse. The realization hit us both at the same time. The dark presence wasn't just here, it was because of Victor. His ritual had backfired, releasing whatever malevolent force had been trapped in the house. Now it fed on fear, lurking in the shadows, tormenting anyone who dared to live here. Suddenly, the whispers felt closer, no longer a distant murmur but a low, menacing chant, filling the room. My heart raced as I grabbed Anna's hand, pulling her toward the stairs. We needed to get out of there, but as we turned to leave, I could feel it, something was watching us. By the time we decided to act, it was already too late. The whispers had evolved into blood-curdling screams, echoing through the house at all hours of the night. It wasn't just the sound anymore. Shadows moved in ways that defied logic, stretching and contorting as if they had a mind of their own. The very walls seemed to breathe, closing in on us with every step. The house was alive, and it was angry. Anna and I could barely speak to each other. Fear had a grip on both of us, tightening with every passing minute. But we knew we had no choice. Victor's journal was our only hope, and even though his ritual had failed, it was the only thing we could cling to. We gathered the items the journal described: salt, candles, and a dagger with strange symbols etched into its blade. Each step felt like we were walking deeper into the unknown, and the house responded. Objects flew across the room with violent force, slamming into walls. Doors creaked open and shut on their own, as if something unseen was taunting us, daring us to continue. We set up the ritual in the center of the living room, the heart of the house. The air around us was thick with tension, the oppressive energy nearly unbearable. I could barely breathe as I traced the symbols on the floor, following Victor's instructions to the letter. Anna lit the candles, her hands trembling so much that I feared she would drop them. And then we began. The moment we started the incantation, the house erupted in fury. The walls groaned, and a cold wind whipped through the room, snuffing out the candles one by one. Shadows darted across the walls, circling us like predators. I could feel the entity's rage, a palpable force pressing down on us, trying to stop us. But we didn't stop. With every word, the energy in the room shifted, growing more volatile, more chaotic. The entity was fighting back, and it was strong. Objects were torn from their places and hurled across the room. The floor shook beneath us, as if the very foundation of the house was coming apart. But then, in a moment of clarity, Anna's voice cut through the chaos, stronger than I had ever heard it before. She completed the final words of the ritual, and for a second, everything went silent. The world seemed to hold its breath. And then, a scream. Not a human scream, but something otherworldly, something ancient and filled with malice. The shadows twisted violently before retreating into the walls, disappearing as suddenly as they had appeared. It was over. Or at least, we thought it was. As the air cleared and the oppressive energy lifted, Anna and I collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. We had done it. The entity was gone. But before it vanished completely, a cold voice filled the room, so soft it was almost a whisper, "You are not the last." A chill ran down my spine. Even in its defeat, the entity had left a mark on us, a final chilling warning that the cycle would continue, that others would come, that this was not the end. We left the house the next day, packing up everything we could and vowing never to return. We put it up for sale, hoping to leave it behind forever. But even as we drove away, I could feel it. The whispers. Faint, just on the edge of hearing, but there. Always there. And now, every time I close my eyes, I can still hear them. The entity may be gone from the house, but it's not gone from us. And remember, not all stories end when the video does. Sleep well if you can.